One of the subtler lessons from the Korean War is how soldiers' comfort, or, the lack of it, directly affected operational effectiveness. Commanders often assumed that modern-issued winter gear and field stoves would prevent frostbite, cold-related fatigue, and, even morale collapse. But in reality, supply lines faltered, issued equipment failed in those extreme conditions, and troops often had to improvise warmth on the spot. Commanders often assumed that modern-issued winter gear and field stoves would prevent frostbite, cold-related fatigue, and morale collapse. In reality, supply lines faltered, issued equipment failed in extreme conditions, and troops often had to improvise warmth on the spot. What Korea underscored, repeating patterns seen in World War II, was that small portable solutions could determine whether soldiers endured a night of freezing conditions or suffered debilitating cold injuries. If you value history that explores practical survival knowledge alongside strategy, go ahead and subscribe to Backyard Wisdom. This channel uncovers the overlooked techniques and innovations that soldiers developed out of necessity, skills that remain surprisingly relevant today. One of the most remarkable of these is the scrap stove, a compact improvised pocket heater that turned discarded materials into a reliable source of heat, often saving lives during long nights in cold trenches or foxholes. The first insight is that survival depended on making warmth portable. World War II soldiers quickly realized that large, stationary stoves or campfires were often impractical. Supply lines were unreliable, front lines shifted, and exposing yourself to build a fire could be fatal. The scrap stove emerged from this need, a portable small-scale device made from discarded cans, tin, and other household or military scrap materials. It allowed soldiers to carry warmth with them, lighting small fuel sources directly where they needed it most. During the Korean War, units lacking this improvisational knowledge suffered disproportionately from exposure during night operations. The key lesson is that small transportable heat sources multiplied survivability when conventional methods were unavailable or unsafe. The principle remains relevant for modern survivalists. Mobility often outweighs size when it comes to maintaining warmth in hostile conditions. The second insight is that ingenuity allowed soldiers to convert trash into life-saving tools. The scrap stove was a product of necessity and observation. Soldiers noticed that metal containers used for food, ration tins, or discarded ammunition cases could contain fuel safely while directing heat efficiently. Even simple modifications like, puncturing ventilation holes or folding edges to create a stable platform dramatically improved performance. In Korea, these improvisational skills, they translated directly into survival outcomes. Units trained to observe and repurpose their environment had access to heat when others did not. The broader lesson here is that effectiveness in extreme conditions depends less on the equipment issued and more on the ability to assess materials and adapt them to immediate needs. The third insight is that fuel efficiency was just as critical as portability. World War II scrap stoves were designed to burn small amounts of fuel while still producing enough heat to warm hands, cook minimal rations, or even dry damp clothing. Soldiers relied on scraps of wood, paper, or charcoal, making every gram of fuel count. The stove's enclosed design focused heat right where it was needed, minimizing waste. During the Korean War, soldiers operating in mountainous regions discovered that inefficient stoves drained their limited fuel rapidly, forcing long exposure during refueling or foraging. The World War II innovation of a compact, efficient pocket heater underscored an enduring survival principle. Conserving resources while maximizing effect is far more valuable than sheer size or intensity of output. The fourth insight is that simple construction reduced failure risk. Unlike larger stoves that required precision assembly or fragile parts, scrap stoves were resilient. A few punctured ventilation holes, a folded top, or a makeshift stand often sufficed. Materials were widely available, repairs were straightforward, and performance was predictable. Korean War experience reinforced the importance of reliability over complexity. Soldiers who relied on untested or over-engineered stoves often experienced catastrophic failures at the worst possible moments. The World War II approach, really prioritized usability and maintainability. It taught us that, especially in survival scenarios, a simple, repeatable design often outperforms technically superior but fragile alternatives. The fifth insight here is that, well, training and habit actually determined effectiveness. Even the best scrap stove was honestly useless if soldiers did not know how to assemble, ignite, and maintain it efficiently. World War II veterans developed routines, selecting fuel, controlling airflow, adjusting positioning, and of course, monitoring heat output. This knowledge, more often than not, spread informally, passed from experienced soldiers to new recruits. During Korea, units that embraced these habits were able to maintain warmth during night operations, cook small rations, and prevent cold injuries even under supply shortages. This really underscores a general lesson: for survival tools are only as effective as the operator's experience and discipline. So, the sixth insight is that improvisation complemented rather than replaced formal equipment. Scrap stoves did not replace issued field stoves, heaters, or winter gear. They supplemented them, providing redundancy when standard equipment failed or was unavailable. Soldiers carried them tucked in packs, ready to deploy in emergency scenarios, from night watches to frozen bivouacs. This dual approach, using both issued and improvised resources, was validated in Korea. Units that integrated improvisational heating with standard protocols suffered fewer casualties and maintained higher operational efficiency than units that relied exclusively on formal equipment. The lesson remains clear: adaptability enhances resilience, and improvisation is, an essential complement to planning. The seventh insight is that observing environmental conditions magnified survival advantages. Effective use of a scrap stove required situational awareness. Soldiers learned to deploy stoves in wind-sheltered locations, near protective cover, or within dugouts that reflected and retained heat. Improper placement reduced effectiveness and could even create hazards such as flare-ups or smoke accumulation. In Korean mountainous operations, these details mattered profoundly. Small adjustments to stove placement could extend warmth, preserve fuel, and reduce exposure during those long, arduous watches. You see, World War II veterans had internalized these environmental lessons, demonstrating that survival is as much about technique as it is about tools. It's fascinating, really, how these principles hold such modern relevance. What the scrap stove reveals is that, ingenuity, mobility, and resource awareness are really timeless survival principles. Across conflicts from World War II to Korea and even beyond, the scrap stove exemplifies a broader truth. Survival depends on understanding materials, conserving resources, and applying knowledge under pressure. Soldiers who mastered these devices had a tangible advantage in endurance, comfort, and operational readiness. Those who ignored improvisational methods paid a pretty steep price in exposure injuries, fatigue, and reduced effectiveness. Modern survivalists, field engineers, and emergency planners can still learn from these designs. A pocket heater need not be a relic. It illustrates the enduring importance of compact, efficient, and adaptable solutions in hostile conditions. Remembering these wartime innovations matters because they highlight lessons that remain relevant today. The scrap stove was more than a convenience. It was a practical application of ingenuity, observation, and resourcefulness. Soldiers who understood how to turn discarded tins into warmth preserved life under circumstances that conventional equipment alone just could not mitigate. If you value historical lessons that reveal both practical survival knowledge and human adaptability, go ahead and subscribe to Backyard Wisdom. Share this video with others who appreciate serious, in-depth exploration of how ordinary materials became extraordinary tools in extraordinary circumstances. World War II's secret scraps stove reminds us that survival is less about what you are issued and more about how you use what is around you.